that we're going to be having some more join us along the way. We're excited about that. If you could let us know in the chat box where you are from, where you're viewing this from, just so we can get a feel for how far this presentation will be reaching. All right, so before we start the presentation, just want to give some quick updates. What we're going to do is we're going to have, we're going to be recording this presentation. Once we finish the presentation, we will make some decisions regarding access to that, how others outside in the of Upstate Cerebral Palsy can access the video. We're going to keep the attendees on mute throughout the entire presentation. Any questions that you do have, just go through the chat box and let us know those questions. We will have time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. I ask that you try to get at more broad questions that will be applicable to a broader audience rather than more specific questions related to your learner. But if you do have some questions that are specific, certainly you can ask them and we'll try to get to them. And I think that's it. I'll let you know along the way that at times with the group that's working here, we both work within a school age population as well as adult population. So when we talk about our learners, at times we'll go back and forth with using the term kids. It's not meant to be derogatory in any way, but just shows the different programs that we're working in. Slide. Advance. Oh, you ready? All right, so here's the presentation outline. Here's what we're going to cover. Going to talk a little bit about the group that's up here that's going to be presenting. We'll talk about Upstate Cerebral Palsy and give you an overview of our agency. We'll talk about our relationship with FDF Behavioral Consultants. And then we're going to get into some great video, and that's what we're excited about today. One of the reasons why we chose the Zoom conference is we would have a little bit more control of the videos and where they are released. But we will be showing some videos of some of our learners, both in our adult program, as well as some older students that are of adult age in our school age program. And finally, we'll have the 15 minutes to a half hour at the end just to cover some questions and answers. All right, so here's the group of players that are going to be presenting today. I'm Eric Jacobson, Chief Psychologist at Upstate Cerebral Palsy. John Horn is our Senior BCBA in the Adult Division. Allison Kim is our Senior BCBA at Tradewinds Utica. Tradewinds is one of our school age programs. Tabitha Collins above Shai LaBeouf is our Senior BCBA at our Chadwick's program. And Dr. Mara Vandezel is our Senior BCBA at Tradewinds Rome. Shai LaBeouf is there. You guys probably seen me post gifs about him. He is our team spirit animal. We definitely live by his motto of just doing it, not making dreams dreams. And yesterday you said tomorrow. Things that we try to work on all the time is not allowing what we would like to do prevent us from doing it and just going forward. All right, Upstate Cerebral Palsy. All right, there is a picture up there of New York State. For those of you that are not in the United States, New York State is a pretty large state. We are in the upstate region and about 4 hours from New York City. If you're driving with Greg Hanley, that might be 3 hours. But we're the red region that's up above. We span not only in that county there, but several other counties in that area. We have around 2,000 employees that work at the agency. We're part of a larger parent organization, Upstate Caring Partners. As far as Upstate Cerebral Palsy, we're one of the major providers in the central New York upstate region related to day residential care and community services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. At times, Upstate Cerebral Palsy can be a bit of a misnomer. The term cerebral palsy in our name, we actually, while we do provide services for individuals with cerebral palsy, the majority of individuals that live in our adult and school age programs or reside in our adult and school age residences, as well as go to our day services, fit within the autism spectrum disorder as well as intellectual disabilities. And I should say all with an intellectual disability with or without an autism spectrum disorder. We have two major divisions that we're going to be talking about today. Our Educational Services Division is what is commonly known as Tradewinds. If you see me on Facebook, that's what we'll often reference, and that's where our BCBAs are here from. Outside of our Tradewinds Education and Residential Center, we also have early intervention and preschool services. As far as Tradewinds goes, we have 72 kids that live with us residentially, and of those 72 who also go to our school, there's an additional 120 that go to our 3 school programs. So it's a pretty large school program for kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Those students are primarily referred to our program due to behavioral challenges, and that's what makes the IISCA so great. The other part of this is our adult community services. This is mostly based in the Mohawk Valley region. We have roughly 250 individuals that are in our residential program, and an additional 50 on top of that to come to day services. So again, it's a pretty large program. We have both traditional day habilitation services and then some more alternative services that are out in the community. All right, so here's the good stuff. Our timeline with FTF. So this all started back in 2017. I was at APBA in New Orleans, and I was able to hear some of Greg's graduate students speak about the work they were doing with the IISCA. They spoke about something that was relatively brief compared to traditional functional analysis, and that it parlayed right into a treatment model. It was, for me, it was something that was eye-opening, something that we were always interested in doing, moving more towards having a functional analysis instead of an indirect functional behavior assessment. So it caught my eye. Greg, there was a bit of a buzz around this new model that was moving away from the traditional functional analysis, and so it sparked an interest in me. We left. We ended up getting the FIT school, or the FIT program related to his IISCA, and we were able to view that. We were further interested in that. Dr. Scott Tanner was able to go out to find Greg at another conference and said, we need to connect. And Scott was able to get him back to our program, where in 2017, we had our first on-site training with the group that's up there. This was at the end of the training. We were pretty pumped because it was a new way that we could address challenging behaviors. One of the things that I loved about Greg from the beginning, I said, we have no BCBAs that are working in our program at the time. And he said, we can still make this work. It's something that you can pull off. We had a number of certified and licensed clinicians, but no BCBAs. Since that time, we've moved into more of an analytic model where we have 7 BCBAs at this time. By 3 years from this time, we should have around 25 BCBAs that are in our program. We are sending additional staff back to school in order to get that certification. So it's pretty exciting for us, and a lot of that's been driven by the work that we've done with Greg. From 2018 to 2019, we did a lot of capacity building, not only in terms of training that was on site, but also in terms of getting those additional staff that would allow us to make this stuff stick and provide supervision related to that work, given the scope and size of our program. So that's what we focused on at that point. One of the best things that came out of that time was moving to a supervision model from FTF, with both doing on-site workup of cases and then doing follow-up with Zoom conferences where we were able to get ongoing feedback that allowed us to stick to the treatment that we were providing, as well as give us more technical feedback related to those cases. 2019 to 2020 was the most work that we saw related to the IISCA, given the additional BCBAs that were on our site, the ones that are sitting up here. It really allowed us to move with many more cases and get to some great positive outcomes that you're going to get a chance to see today. Also on that third slide, or third picture that you see up there, is that due to the outcomes that we were getting to with our cases that we were never able to get to previously, it got a lot of attention from our program and from our clinical department. And so what you see here is Greg speaking with our executive leadership related to being part of a strategic planning initiative, and more specifically incorporating the IISCA as part of that process. Since that time, and what I'm really excited about and part of Greg's visit here today, is that we were able to talk about universal protocols and more of a broad way to address challenging behavior before it occurs, and then more specifically when it is occurring and it is ongoing, to using that IISCA process. So that should give you a good feel for our work that we've done with Dr. Hanley along the way, and our work that we're going to be doing in 2020. One second. So, oh, there it goes. Oh, this is, what's up?
Technical difficulties.
We have a little technical difficulties here. What I'll say before we jump into that, some other things that we've been doing that have been pretty exciting, working with some of his other consultants like Shannon that's here today, but we've also been doing some food selectivity work with Holly Gover, which is great. And Tony Camilleri has been working with our administrative team related to moving a more analytic model through our program. So it's all been terrific.
All right. I'm John Horn, Senior BCBA for the Adult Division at Upstate Cerebral Palsy.
As we've started to implement the process in the adult division with adult participants, I think the big takeaway for us so far is that the process really is the same. You hear the phrase being tossed around, trust the process, and that really applies here. There may be some modifications that you have to make, and we'll go over some of those considerations, but the process really is mostly the same. You trust the process, and the speed that you go through may be modified. But again, I think some of those factors may not be due to age, but other factors that we've experienced working with the younger population. So some things that you might want to consider working with adults. It may be the case that adults have a longer learning history. Whether or not that slows the process down, I think is up for debate. But I think you just work your way through it just like you would any participant. So working against those longer learning histories may be an issue, at least conceptually. Novel reinforcers. So you may run into a situation in which the reinforcement context includes uniquely adult options. So an example of that is during an interview, the team for one of the participants mentioned that videos of women in bikinis was something that may be included in the synthesized reinforcement context. So far we haven't had to worry about that in this particular case. He's been more thoroughly entertained by all of the other options available to him. However, that may be a conversation that teams have to work around and plan around. Naturally, adult participants on average are going to be bigger and stronger than children participants. I think on average, again, I've worked with plenty of big, strong teenagers. So given that, the emphasis in the process on safety and televisability is all the more relevant and appreciated by the teams. Really reinforcing those R2s during analysis keeps everything safe, going smoothly. But again, overall, age doesn't seem to be the biggest factor that impacts the progress through the phases of the PFA and the SBT. Things that seem to have the biggest impact is whether or not the participants have functional communication and language, their functioning level, and whether or not they're prescribed psychotropic medications. Okay, some of our game plan working with adults, we wanted to find a good location. Ideally, you want to have a treatment space, but it isn't always necessary. So a 10 by 10 a room is sufficient to set up the two different contexts. But as you'll see in some of our videos, we're not always in a treatment space. Sometimes we're in a gym, sometimes we're in a program room. Before we get to a generalization phase, we might be starting the SBT right in the program room if that's the most relevant context and it makes the most sense clinically. All right, so case selection, something that we really aren't limiting who we're running the process with. I think our only advice there is if you're starting off at a new location where this is really new to the staff and the teams, you try to pick somebody that's more of a quick win. And what I mean by that is somebody who has more frequent challenging behavior. It's occurring for more predictable reasons. The reinforcement is deliverable. So those might be some considerations if it's brand new. Look for those quick wins. For the considerations with the PFA and the SBT, you really want to focus with the end goal in mind. When we fill out the worksheets that FTF provides for the PFA and the SBT, you really want to fill out those CAB branches and you want to know where you're going, what you're aiming at with your skill development. Things can change along the way and often do, but it's nice to have that laid out on the front end. Video analysis, one of the biggest takeaways that I would like to communicate today is that video analysis is so important. We're always learning. I can't tell you the number of times where I've viewed my own behavior on camera and I've made significant adjustments to what I'm doing, seeing how my behavior is impacting the participant or events in the environment, how we're delivering reinforcement, how we're behaving during the reinforcement context, how we're presenting the EO. We're going to show throughout some of our videos adjustments that we've made. Okay, and some pragmatics. We're trying to get 3 to 5 hours a week in session time. Data collection, we're using the FTF data sheets where we're simply circling a successful trial that was independent with no problem behaviors, or putting a line through it if for whatever reason the trial was a prompted trial. And again, tape the sessions. Video analysis is so incredibly powerful. Okay, so our first participant that I want to go over, MB is a 24-year-old, significant history of self-injurious behavior, aggression, He is one of our more low motivation guys, low agency. He has few reinforcers that I would say are deliverable reinforcers, but a number of reinforcers that are more subtle that we've identified. History of seizures, definitely a significant number of medications, and slow progress. Long-term care, nonverbal, no functional communication other than some generalized commands like more. Okay, so his R1s are SIV and aggression, like we talked about. R2s, you'll see him covering his ears. He'll put his hand up to his mouth, frowning, yelling, or slapping his wrist. That could quickly turn into more significant self-injurious behavior. His reinforcement that we've identified are access to a ball, a basketball usually for bounce pass. He likes some music on YouTube, the Good Morning song, Elmo song, Sesame Street. Some level of one-on-one attention, but it's that give and take balance where sometimes he wants more space from you. And escape from demands. The EO, saying no, transitions away from preferred activity. Access to reinforcement is delayed or disruptive, and staff report aggression prior to seizures, which is not obviously an EO that we program into our sessions. Okay, so what happened? Our first, our takeaway and results, our analysis, there was no clear turnoff in our first analysis, our first go at it. R2s were happening. It was a safe analysis, but R2s were happening throughout the reinforcement context. And a lot of that had to do with getting to know this gentleman and really pairing with him and getting that reinforcement context right. So what we did is we went back with the advice of our consultants at FTF. We went back and really just replicated that reinforcement context, made subtle changes to make sure that we could get maybe a half hour straight without any R2s. I'll show some video in the next slide. Some other advice was to use analysis as a screener. So his behavior, the R2s that we observe in sessions are identifying some of those unplanned EOs, things that we maybe didn't target in the interview. Okay, and also some good advice was if any R2s are occurring, really look at the video, go back, ABC view that video analysis and see what's going on, really focusing on the A of the ABC, what's going on right before that seems to trigger those R2s. So we've made some subtle approaches. So the next slide will show some video. Nice. So cool. Here it comes. Whoa!
Ball hit him in the knee and make his reflex go.
Up to the moon. Oh, nice catch.
Hey, Joe.
Whoa, big pass. Here it comes from the moon. Oh. Okay, so some real quick talking points on that. This gentleman, getting to know him has been great. He was very hesitant to participate with me with anything. I didn't have any reinforcement history with him. So especially if he had a preferred staff in the room, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get him to go with me to a different context at all. So I just followed his lead for a while. I sat with him, replicated that reinforcement context. And the big win for me, I noticed things were heading in the right direction when I would come into his program room and he would approach me. And that to me was a big signal that we were heading in the right direction and we could really replicate that reinforcement context and move back into analysis. One more strategy that we implemented with him on the next slide is we started to use armbands or a headband with him. I used an armband. That was to indicate that it was time for session, that I wanted to work with him, and our relationship represented certain contingencies of reinforcement when the armband is present. I like using that. He was having a particularly difficult time leaving the session, leaving the fun and going back to the room. So having the armband and taking it off, indicating there's a change in our relationship now. It's still a good one, but it's more of a transition back to the room relationship, and it's helping him with those transitions. We do some ball play on the way back and play a song as we're walking back, and then fade that out as he goes back to his room. But that's been helpful to reduce some of the R2s that we observed at the end of session. Yes, sometimes going in during the day, when I'm not going to be working with this participant and I don't have the armband on, signaling that those contingencies are not available. All right, next slide. So next participant is a 29-year-old, history of aggression, a significant history of restraints. He's usually one of the highest in the adult division in terms of number of physical restraints that are used. He's a bright guy, and behaviors have had limited other opportunities that he can pursue. A long history of care and a high number of medications. Okay, so his R1s, aggression, SIB, and property destruction. R2s, he shakes his head no. His head down and facing his hands, groans. He might swear at you, yells, or he might say, "Oh, come on," slams items or doors, are some of the R2s that we identified. The synthesized reinforcement is amazingly fun with him. Loves walkie-talkies, pretending to be a fireman, a paramedic, watching YouTube, Blue Man Group, Star Wars, roller coasters, haunted houses, and what most frequently songs that would sound better with farts in the background. It's something that come up. One-on-one attention is huge for him. That interaction, following his lead, and escape from demands. The EO, being told no, waiting, change of plans, some tricky things, diverted attention when preferred activity ends, and a peer's challenging behavior. If a peer has challenging behaviors in his vicinity, that's very difficult for him to cope with. So those are some things that we're going to work through as we progress. So the first analysis that we did on the the first analysis was a good analysis. However, after 20 minutes, he opted out. And the one thing I was really missing was this sort of fear of missing out. He really wanted to show everybody what he was doing. And so I followed his lead during the reinforcement context and allowed him to go around the room. We do have that open door policy. It's you're free to come and you're free to go. It's choice. We like to communicate that your behavior matters. Your behavior has power. And also something that's worth mentioning in this analysis, because he liked to wander in the second go around, it was a roaming analysis. And what that means is it's not always in the treatment space. The reinforcement context does involve him leaving the treatment space, traveling around the day hab, which is totally okay. We can still present the EOs and document how he responds to that. Okay, so in this video, I want to show a quick on and off. We're going to go do some of this work over here. Oh, you don't want it? Okay, let's go and keep having fun. You're right, you're right. There you go, friend. So you see on the left side of the room is the reinforcement context. He has walkie-talkies, access to YouTube, all the one-on-one attention I can give him. I'm working with him, sharing that experience. So one thing that's kind of cool is he'll communicate. One of the things that I have him working on during EO is sorting through coins, and there's a specific reason for that, but he'll sometimes communicate during reinforcement, no more coins. He doesn't want anything to do with that. So I'm following his lead. The next video, I'll show that. Might as well pop that up right now.
Fire.
Oh, wait. It's a fire drill. Or fire alarm.
I was perfect. Yeah.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's do a little bit of the work over here. Yep, we're gonna. Let's do it. So the clip kind of cuts it off real close, but there's an R2 where he puts his head in his hands, and we quickly reinforce that. This is still analysis in this video. As you can see, I'm following his lead. I like FDF, and Greg has this quote that I really like about letting them fill their space with their behavior during the reinforcement context. And that meant a lot to me. At times, I've been tempted to be like entertainer during the reinforcement context, and there's a fine line you want to draw there. You want to model the fun, show how to have fun with something without necessarily making it a demand. And so so that was always a helpful concept that I wanted to share with this group. So let him fill the space with his behavior during the reinforcement context. Okay, next slide is reviewing the pregame chat. I usually do this outside of the treatment space, but I'll review what the new rules are when we're moving from analysis to FCT or moving from FCT to toleration. I like to do a quick pregame chat, and this video just shows how I go about doing that. All right. Okay, so here's the new rules. We're going to be having fun like we always do. But when I say time for some work, you can just say, my way, and we'll go back to having fun, okay? It's all yours, my friend.
Come on.
Cool, fun to hang out with. Yeah, you know who he is. Yeah, he got hit by, I think, a lifesaver. All right, we'll set him down immediately. Is this the guy? Yes, he just collapsed. I don't know what happened. We were having a sword fight. Let me check his heart. Oh, he's getting up.
Nobody wants to go in lawless.
Actually, we're gonna go do some work right now.
Okay.
You got it, buddy. Let's go back to having your way.
Thank you, way.
What else? Do you want me to bring anything?
Good.
Just this? Okay.
You know, one of the things I really like about this is, you know, oftentimes for our adult population, they're not able to engage in some of the developmental activities that they really like to engage in. And I think this highlights it here where CM would not likely have the opportunity to engage in a lightsaber duel battle and also be a fire chief and be able to direct people around with those kind of play activities. So this is just awesome.
Yep. And to be clear too, these are activities that CM has requested that I participate with. And okay, we also incorporated the arm band with him as well for similar reasons that I mentioned before. So in this slide, increasing the complexity, well, what I'm doing is I'm varying the language in which I present the EO, and also I turn away a little bit for teaching him to approach me to say, excuse me. Well, you're good at this. Hey, before we check out anything else, let's do some of our work. Yes, Chris. You can have your way, absolutely. Yeah, let's head this way. We'll do the coins again. Hey, what's up, Chris?
My way.
Sure, buddy. You can have your way. All right. So there's a fine line between errorless teaching and also keeping the behavior under control of the EO. And so once somebody is independent, so you can go ahead to the next slide. Once somebody is independent with their FCR for a while, but then all of a sudden they don't, you signal the EO, they transition to that workspace, the table of high expectations, and they're not asking for my way. Sometimes it's not always best to prompt right away. Give it about 20 seconds in which you progress the EO, and I'll show this video so you can see what that looks like. All right, I want you to get all the pennies out. While you're doing that, I'm going to talk to Tom. Hey, Tom.
Hey, what's up, bro?
I'm just chilling, man. How's your day going?
Oh, it's going all right. You know, walking around, iPad in front of me. You know, Wednesday.
Where's you going?
Can you do your pennies?
Where's you going?
Just keep doing your pennies, okay? You got it, friend.
When we get fire grilling again, it's better to get fire in the grill.
So yeah, after approximately 20 seconds, if progressing the EO doesn't fire up that FCR the my way, then you can go ahead and prompt. And that was a helpful thing that I learned from the FTF team when we were consulting with them and previous participants that we worked with. So next we're going to move on. Our senior BCBA at our Chadwick site at Tradewinds, Tabitha Collins, will be presenting on BO.
So BO is 17 years old. He has severe ASD. I rebooted the IISCA with him, or the PFA, after talking to Greg Hanley this past fall, specifically about his case. The previous clinical team had attempted it, and they were unable to get Happy, Relaxed, Engaged. And I wasn't really sure what that looked like. His classroom wasn't really sure what that looked like. There was a lot of, sometimes this escalates, sometimes it calms him. So Greg just told us to trust the process. So I did, and we learned a lot. We're consulting with Shannon from FTF, and we're just cleaning up our analysis. We're still on Happy, Relaxed, Engaged, but the video will show you more about that. Oh, there's a video.
Video.
That is a video. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
There we
why
go.
it's blank. There we go.
Yellow cow.
Yellow cow.
Why? 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 Why?
What?
E-L-L-O-W-C-O-W. Yellow cow. Sure, please.
Cow. Time for work.
Time to work.
Okay, no, you can have it back. Look.
Hey,
Have it back. My turn.
my turn.
Thank you.
Never.
Let's read it.
Okay, it's birds. Hi.
Birds.
Right.
Riddle.
Riddle. My tail. Present. Fly. Clams.
Clams.
Song.
Nice song.
Patrick.
Patrick.
No. SpongeBob.
SpongeBob.
Note. Listen.
Time for work. Okay, time for work.
Time to work.
Okay, here.
Hey,
Here, you can have your stuff back.
Take it. You find it?
I'll stop.
All tomatoes?
So a few other points I wanted to make was we switched therapists during this process because I was unable to provide as much time with him compared to Brittany, our other BCBA, Brittany Douglas. So like John was suggesting that 3 to 5 hours a week is the suggestion made to us. So we made sure to switch our therapist, and both Brittany and I are new to the process, so we're learning a lot. And we're getting there. I think he is happy, relaxed, and engaged in that last video. So we'll move forward with teaching the simple FCR. Okay. Just change the camera to Allison.
Oh, right.
Hi. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce. Allison Kim, our senior BCBA at Utica.
We're gonna get this down.
Hi, everyone. So the student that I'm going to talk about today is our clinical team working with our learner who's 15 years old. He's non-vocal verbal, has severe autism, limited reinforcers, and very severe self-interest behavior. This learner of ours also previously attended a intensive ABA clinic to try and get problem behavior under control. So the first clip that you're going to see, I guess we'll do the one on the left first. Before we play it though, just some talking points about him. Our learner really had synthesized reinforcers that's so powerful for him, including attention and videos, but sometimes access to attention. So it's really critical that during part of his synthesized reinforcer was that the clinicians were available to him if he wanted their attention. What you'll see in this clip is this is actually teaching day 2 with him, and you'll see that he's learning the game. So initially he'll get up and kind of leave the environment, but the clinicians will prompt him to say "my way" with a Big Mac button. What's so interesting about this montage is you'll see as time progresses in our teaching sessions that the second time he actually pushes the button himself and he kind of looks around and is just amazed at what he just communicated and how it impacted his world. And then later on, you'll see it kind of progress where he's just doing independent responses. So part of the EO for this learner was that work was presented, stereotypy was blocked, and you'll also see the clinicians standing behind the learner to limit their attention.
Keep going. Oh.
You're wet, you're wet.
Oh, you can have your way. Thanks for coming to the table. Oh, awesome, Nikki.
It's just so great. It's so reinforcing. That's Erica Di Natale, soon to become BCBA, and Miss Alicia. As time kind of progressed, working with FTF consultants, what we found was that our student was very influenced by attention. So Greg came up with the idea for the clinical staff to really limit and minimize attention during the EO by wearing sunglasses. So it's a very interesting kind of teaching process for this individual learner, and it was really fun. I think the clinical team had fun working with it. So what you'll see in this clip is, again, that attention was really a strong component of his synthesized reinforcer. The sunglasses were there to, when the EO was in place, to really clearly indicate to this learner, to make it very clear in the teaching process that attention was not available. And then you'll see when he says "my way," the sunglasses come off, and it's very clear that, hey, we're available, we're here if you want to attend to us. In this clip, you'll also see the beginning, he's really starting to learn the game, and you can see that he's smiling, his affect is very different, which changed a great deal during his learning journey. At the end of the video clips, as time kind of passes on, you'll see how the clinical team has been shaping a toleration response, initially prompted, and then towards the end, a independent toleration response, which is very easy for him at this point.
Oh, here it comes. There he is. Sure, you can have my way, but don't say my way. Okay, Nikki. My way. Sure, you can have my way. Great job. Okay, Nikki. Time for some work. My way. You can say my way. Not right now. Okay, good job saying okay. Here you go. Thanks for saying my way. No. Good job. Scoot your chair in. Thanks for scooting your chair in. Watch me.
That's also shout out at the end. That's Miss Nicole Hogenkamp, who's our BCBA on the Utica team. Next is Dr. Mara Vanderzell at the Rome campus presenting AQ.
Hello, everyone. I would just like to talk about a couple learners that I've been working with. Again, bridging that gap from child services to adult services. The two students I'm going to be talking about, AQ is 18 years old. She has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. She is nonverbal. She also has profound hearing loss and wears a cochlear implant and has a diagnosis of mild to moderate ID. She engages in very high intensity aggression and self-injurious behavior with a nearly one-to-one correspondence that every time these behaviors occur, it ends up in a physical intervention or a physical hold or restraint. In the division, in the children's division, she is one of our highest restraint receivers. So we were really excited to be working with her. And get to her video. I can talk a little bit about So the two students that I'm going to be speaking about, we've kind of, we're almost at the promised land with them. We've got to some really meaningful outcomes. The video that you're going to be seeing is AQ in her residence. She is a residential student with us and lives on our campus. And you'll be seeing her engage in contextually appropriate behavior in her residence with a residence manager. So this is kind of, we're getting to the end phase. She is engaged in the skill-based treatment for the 6 hours of her school day, and now we're working on making this a 24/7 experience for her. As a side note, outside of this video, when the clinician, Sean Badger, who's pursuing his BCBA, started and introduced this into the residence with the residence manager, she saw her My Way card come out and got really excited and did a very happy, engaged in very happy stereotypy. So she was thrilled to be engaged in this process in this environment.
I'll hold this so you don't get confused. Awesome. Hi.
So that is, again, a student that is further along in the process. At the end of the video, yeah. We should go to the next slide. The next student that I'd like to talk about is JR. He's also 18 years old. He's diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He's nonverbal. Again, engages in high intensity aggression and self-injurious behavior. He is also one of our higher restraint receivers in the division, and also has a history of inpatient hospitalizations at specialized hospitals on the East Coast, trying to stabilize his behavior and make some gains. So in terms of some meaningful outcomes for him, looking at his functional life skills, just improved quality of life. His extended family owns a local restaurant in the area, and one of the team's goals is to have him have employment there. So we thought, you know, what better way to do that but through the skill-based process, and teach him some skills that would be associated with a job as a busboy. So what you're going to see him do in the video is bust a table, clean the table, and roll some silverware in preparation for employment.
Hey, can you finish busting this table for me?
Awesome. Let's fast forward. Yeah, very fit, very fit. The whole process.
Nice job, bud. Come here. Let's grab these lights and clean out the table. Awesome. Alright, come over here now.
Oh, great. Come here. Silly. Yeah, okay, silverware now. Let's roll some silverware now. Great, I'll take one too.
in that video is, you know, these are tasks that are difficult for him, but he persists and tries to make improvements on his behavior. You can see when he took 2 wrappers out to wrap the silverware, he persisted and didn't get frustrated and put one back. Another thing that I'd like to highlight about what you just saw is the collaboration between the student and the therapist that's working with them, and that's something we've learned with consulting with FTF, is that this shouldn't be an overly directive process. We want to do work with kids and with adults, and not just be kind of hovering over them, you know, with you know, kind of barking directions. So the subtleties of this video is that you can see that the student engages in the behaviors and then the therapist. So there could be chances for modeling, but most times we wait for the student to initiate, and then we follow suit to say, hey bud, we're going to do this together.
Great. So that was all of the videos and case presentations. So just to let you know that if you want to see more about Upstate Cerebral Palsy, you can check them out on Facebook. They're also, check out the website, upstatecp.org. Lastly, on LinkedIn, they're also available. I also do try to post some information related to the work that we're doing on LinkedIn. As far as Facebook goes, the BCBA is using the IISCA is generally where we're involved in more conversations, particularly related to this. We're excited in the next month. We're going to have Pat McGreevy on site, where we're going to be rolling out his essential skills for living. We're excited to see where that's going to go for our group. We're going to have some dialogue with the Facebook Live group on BCBAs using the IISCA with Dr. Hanley and Dr. McGreevy. So that's going to be pretty exciting. That should happen at the end of the month, hopefully, that through the current concerns related to the coronavirus, that we're going to be able to hold that.
We're not done yet. People are thinking we're done.
Okay, so these are done with the videos. We're not done yet. The moderator told me. Just want to say thank you. This has really been a terrific 2+ years working with FTF. We've had some great experiences. See a picture up top with Ditu when he was here. I'm working with our crew, Great My Way video with our Tradewinds group. On to the left there, Dr. Hanley and Jeremy Earl, who's the Vice President of School Age Services. Down below, one nice thing is at one of our affiliates, they have a rock wall. So we were able to do some climbing as well as go on a zip line with Dr. Hanley. And finally, when I was in line at the beginning, when I say we're really in Shia LaBeouf, here's my man, John Horn, doing his best impersonation of Shia. He's just doing it. So that's it. We'll open it up for questions. There's a number that are there, and our moderator, Dr. Jean Jacobson, will present some questions.
Okay, so we've got one. Do you ever start the PFA process in the person's residence? And if so, how should we set that up? John?
So have we started one in a residence yet? No, probably not yet. But I don't see how you would set it up too much differently, as long as you can provide the conditions to discriminate between the EO and the reinforcement context. There are probably all kinds of considerations depending on the layout of the house or the room that he's in. You know, time that you would do it, if peers are present or not present. You know, I think simple considerations like that, but we've done it in a program room, in a classroom, at Tradewinds, in a gym, and it really is making sure that those conditions are available, that you can turn it on, turn it off. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think generally, I mean, our model for the most part is a pull-out. We try to use our treatment room just because it's a little easier with videotaping and not getting too involved in what's going on in the classrooms or in the day hab. If that's not available, as John mentioned, though, we float around and do go to wherever it's going to be most effective. You know, I think that's some of the challenges with moving in a new model is identifying the right space. And for us, it's been a treatment space that's been the easiest to move this through. So I would say probably 70% of our cases, that's where we start with, is in an individual treatment room where we do have two-way mirror for supervision in case it's someone that needs that experience as well.
Okay. How about a question for Dr. Hanley?
Sure.
All right. I think this is one you probably get a lot. Can you share your experience in treating severe SIV related to OCD when you cannot always control the SR because of OCD routines?
Sure. There are many children with autism that engage in ritualistic behavior or have strong preferences for things to be a certain way, and it does shade on up to something that sometimes yields a psychiatric diagnosis like obsessive compulsive disorder. But it's all in that same continuum. And I think the main take-home point is we don't fight it at first, but we simply go with it. In other words, to get HRE, we follow the person's lead with the ritual, with the restricted interest, or with the what some people might call compulsive behavior. We don't try to get in the way of it. We simply let it happen. That's the first step of the process. The next step is to try to interrupt it, try to give a clear signal that that ritual or whatnot won't be completed. That usually evokes some sort of frustrated behavior, and at that moment in time, we very quickly honor that behavior. That's the point of, we call that the analysis, but using different language, we would say we're trying to empower the person, teach them that that mild problem behavior allowed them to complete the ritual or compulsive act. By doing that, we think, generally speaking, we build trust and we establish some rapport with the client. And then over time, we simply leverage their motivation to engage in those compulsive behaviors to develop longer and longer chains of adaptive behavior. And what's interesting about the process when there's true compulsive behavior in play is there's some respondent extinction going on. In the skill-based treatment process, there is certainly some physiological indicators that a person's in distress, and as you teach them to engage in alternative behavior during the times they're not engaged in that compulsive act, you see that respondent process happen. Please know that the #1 non-pharmacological intervention for OCD is exposure response prevention. It's ERP. ERP happens in SPT, and if anything, in SPT, the exposure response prevention process is gentler. It's a little bit akin to, it's more similar to desensitization than it is flooding, which ERP sometimes looks more like that flooding process. So I guess in summary, when a child or an adult has those tendencies to ritualize or engage in compulsive behavior, we simply do the process. We trust the process. And if there's any add-on, it's talking to people about saying it's okay to let them engage in the stereotypy, the ritual, and the compulsive act. They're not going to get better at it. They're already great at it. And we need to build in other behavior to compete with it over time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I think this is a good one for Dr. Jacobson, which is great because it's specific to adults. What were the legal considerations you faced using the IISCA with the adult population, and what does the consent process look like?
No, that's good. It's great. Great question. So with both of our bodies, so in our school age division, if it's the assessment and treatment is occurring in a school, we're under our state education regulations. In our adult programs, whether it's in the day hab or it's in the residential programs, we're under our Office of People with Developmental Disability regulations. And so those are the ones that we had to follow. For me, and what I would make a general recommendation is to speak with your regional representative at either of those bodies related to providing this work. In both settings, it was relatively straightforward. In our school setting, we just address it as an FBA and follow that route through that process through the New York State regs. And as we move through the FBA, we actually develop a report through that process. We need to hit all the factors that are required as part of state ed with the regulations for FBAs. And we go back to the committee to make recommendations for treatment. And that's usually just moving into SPT. So that's pretty streamlined and pretty easy. In our adult program, when we're following the OPWDD regulations, we connected with the chief psychologist of New York State related to the regulations. He felt like it was in line with general positive treatment. And I think that's the beauty of the PFA and SPT, and the idea that you're going to produce something that's going to be safe, it's going to be televisable, and that you're going to, it's going to be dignifiable as well. I don't know if that's the word, dignifiable, but it is now. So, so for me, because you're producing that way, we rarely get any significant behaviors occurring. So there's really no concerns related to that. If there were, we would follow our normal emergency procedures related to managing it. But the recommendations coming back to us was that it fit in line with that, and that we were able to proceed through. In our school program, consent's required from the district. The way we have to go is through the district and by the parent. In the OPWDD program, there's no formal consent required. However, we go above and beyond, and we do pursue the consent in order to conduct that PFA and to move to SPT. We like to be clear and transparent, particularly because it's a new initiative, and so everybody knows what we're doing.
So it's a consent for evaluation with the adult program?
With the adult program, that's how we pursue that, but it's not required as part of the regulations to pursue that.
They wanted to know what our specific. Okay. Another one, good for any of you, but maybe also Dr. Jacobson, how do you recommend scaling this for an organization?
Right?
Very strategically. So here's what we did. And you can see by that process. So our first training was in 2017. And like I said, just during the past years where we got a lot of traction with it, for us, the way that we did proceed through the process and what John's doing right now in our adult program is identifying cases that you can make some progress with, being able to video those cases so that you can show your wins. So that's a big thing for us as we're moving it through, is being able to show that you're getting to outcomes. Bar none, the best thing we've done is we've taped all of our sessions, and when we get to something that looks to be successful from a viewer standpoint, we like to show it out to our executive leadership as well as throughout the organization so that they can see exactly what we're doing and the outcomes that we're getting to. So we scaled initially pretty small, tried to get wins with the cases that we are working with, build capacity so everyone feels comfortable with it, and then as capacity is built, then you move out with additional cases along the way. I think that's our approach around it. The other thing that I would say is I don't get a finder's fee for anything like this, but that I would highly recommend hooking up with FTF, Dr. Hanley, go to one of his trainings. If your agency would be able to bring him in for an on-site training and follow-up supervision on cases, that has been the single best thing outside of the other thing that I said was the best thing that you can do to make it move. Greg and his crew do a nice job of having efficient meetings. They give you great technical assistance, but they move your cases along. Sometimes with moving a new initiative through a large agency, there's a lot of obstacles that come your way, and those obstacles get cleared out when you know you're going to have Greg Hanley on a Zoom conference the next week, and you need to be able to show him video.
Okay. Do we have time for another question? We still have a bunch of people.
So we're going to keep on. We'll answer a few more questions and be able to go probably for another 10, 15 minutes. If you need to go, then certainly go, but we'll answer as many questions as fit.
Okay. And I'm going to try to, get to all these questions. Some are a little bit more specific, and maybe someone on the team would be willing to get into like email dialogue with someone here or a chat of some kind. But here's a good general question. I think for John Horn, is the 3 to 5 hours a week all in one session generally, or more spread out, like 1 hour a day kind of thing?
Yeah, we usually try to spread it out 1 hour a day, and I think that's also what's most feasible for the teams up there. I think it would be overwhelming to come in all at once, especially this is new for the adult division. This is really new. All the concepts are really new, so we try to split it up about sometimes sessions are a little bit shorter than an hour, but we try to stay around an hour.
Okay, and so Tab shaking her head, same thing in the
Same,
schools?
yeah, and if we're not able to provide that in session time, the BCBA Brittany Douglas is going in and just hanging out with them and continuing to build a relationship outside of sessions.
Okay, great. Has anyone had any results generalizing to the community yet? And if so, how did that go? Or if not, do you have plans to do that?
I think the farthest we've gotten is to a different setting, a different location with a different group of staff. But obviously with the two adolescents that I spoke about, that is the plan, is to get them out in the community now that their behavior is safer to do so, and they've gained a lot of skills. To speak to AQ a little bit more, she is doing lots of tasks within the school. She is delivering mail and going shredding and making copies, and we've had to send out a memo to the staff in the school to say, if you see her in the hallways by herself, that's the way it's supposed to be. She's supposed to be independent, and don't get alarmed. She's doing her jobs. So that is the goal.
Okay, great. Actually, while we're on you, Dr. Vanderbilt, with the busboy, a couple people wanted to know what that transition was like from the SR to behavior that was shown in the video, like the earlier stages, I guess?
So similar to, so with those young adults that I showed, they're in very long cab chains, and to make this an efficient meeting, I really tried to trunk it down to the meaningful skill that I wanted to highlight. However, the process starts the same way. The EO is in place, it's time to do some work, and the communication is generated. So for both individuals, I think with AQ, you did see her exchange picture cards. The same with JR, where they were told, "Nope, sorry, can't have your way right now," and they demonstrate a toleration response, and we say, "Okay, come on, let's go do X, Y, or Z." So the process is exactly the same. It's just the later stages. In terms of reinforcement, what the reinforcement conditions look like for AQ, you kind of saw that in the start of her video. She kind of likes her little nook with all of her gadgets and an iPad and staff available to her. And JR is similar. He likes toys that have some sort of visual component. He likes to look at an iPad. He likes to have somebody, nearby and available to him as well. So we kind of terminated the EO, they just returned to those reinforcement conditions.
Okay. Thank you. Great. I think this is a question probably for more of like an outpatient setting, or maybe in a school if you're doing like pull-out therapy sessions. Someone asked, would you use a visual signal such as a specific colored t-shirt or something in the room during SBT sessions so that the learner knows contingencies have changed from a typical therapy session?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be analogous to the armband, just signaling what the relationship is going to be when the sessions are highly reinforcing, and so when they see the armband, a lot of times it's helpful for discriminating those conditions.
Okay, great.
We like the handkerchief because it kind of looks like we're in like a nice kind of gang.
Yeah.
When we're going into it, so that when we're providing it, that's very clear. And it's nice too, particularly when it's school, because there's no expectation when John's wearing his headband, they know what's going on.
Yeah.
And otherwise, not only for the student, but for staff. Yeah. It leads to less confusion along the way.
If you have somebody that maybe diverted attention as part of their EO, and you're walking through the hallway, maybe that's part of their reinforcement, you run into other staff that want to talk to you, and it pulls your attention away, that could be evocative of R1s and R2s. So you want to make sure that staff are aware as well.
Do you ever just dress up like Shia LaBeouf, and does that have any added benefit?
Probably just more benefit to your self-esteem. Generally speaking, I think it would be a little bit confusing for everyone.
Okay, got it. A lot of really good questions coming up. I'm just trying to pick ones. Has this been ran with any RBTs or only BCBAs?
You have
teacher. Yeah. I think we all start in an expert-driven model, where the BCBA leading the charge. However, as skills are developed with the learner, we bring in more people to the process. So as you saw with AQ, that is a residence manager in her classroom. It's her teacher, it's her TAs, it's the school aides that are working with her. Next after the residence manager, it's going to be the direct service professionals. So we really, we broaden it, but we want to make it nice and clean and tight before we start generalizing.
Those direct service professionals, are they RBTs? Not necessarily, right?
No, but I mean, even outside that, we've had early on in the model, things are changing a little bit with our program and our staffing that's there, but we have staff that are not BCBAs. They're in the process of getting their coursework done. We've had social workers that have run the model, and I think that was early on. I think that was the different groups that we've had. Yeah, but we've had a number of different clinicians. As I mentioned before, we were kind of an eclectic group. That was the group that was doing it. As our model has shifted and we're moving more towards this BCBA model, we have less diversity in the group. Most of the people that are doing it now are going back to get their coursework or getting their supervision, or are already certified or licensed as a behavior analyst.
Okay,
but part of our model is with our supervisors are all licensed analysts, so they're providing oversight to it.
Okay. I'm not sure who wants to take this one. I know this has probably occurred. What are you doing if following several 100% correct sessions, you switch to a more advanced CAB and you see a spike in severe challenging behavior? Do you take a step back? Who wants to take that question?
I think, yeah, we trust the process and we let the learner guide us. So if we see behavior, a resurgence of behavior, then we back off a little bit and we slice that demand even thinner. I know a student that wasn't featured in today's presentation, but relinquishing of her positive reinforcers was fine and went swimmingly. However, the CAB 2 of transitioning to the space resulted in significant R1s. So from a sitting down position in one spot to a standing up and walking to another. So we sliced it really thin, and the first expectation was just stand up. Great job, you stood up. That's awesome. Here's all your stuff back. And then it was walk 1 step, and then walk 2 steps, and walk 3 steps, and then sit down. And we found that sit down triggered the R1 again. So we moved the chair back to the stand up. And we started, and then we moved the chair. So that the process really teaches you a lot about the learners.
Yeah.
The video analysis really helps with that kind of component to see, ooh, did we maybe do something wrong in the teaching process? I think the other thing too that's really nice to point out that Greg and the consultants taught us too is if kids are coming back from a long break to kind of go back to earlier cabs and then build it up to see kind of where do we need to start. That's been really kind of helpful in guiding, or if kids are out with the flu or things like that, extended absences. That's been very fruitful.
Okay. I think we kind of addressed this, but let me make sure. Someone who's talking about running this in a center-based school, how many sessions per day, how long? Is 1 session a day, 10 EOs, 5 to 10 minutes? Is that enough, or would it be recommended, if you're going to increase, would you recommend increasing the time or per session, or just run more sessions? Right.
Yeah, I don't mind interest. Please know the dosage of the teaching can vary tremendously, and we know that the minimum range of the range is 2 hours a week. And when this particular study was done, it was done 1 hour twice a week. And so that's why we say try to get at least 2 hours a week. But in practice, when we're working with teams, we really ask, try to get 3 to 5 hours of teaching time in, and it's better if it's distributed. So we'd rather have it 5 times a week at 45 minutes than 2.5 hours and 2.5 hours, okay? As far as should you do 10 trials or 5 trials or an hour, it's really up to you. Let the resources and logistics dictate that, but just try to get some teaching in every day. That they're in your program. And please know that there are people who do this all day. They don't wear the headbands and all that because the outside of session time, the young adult is in so much crisis that you really need to stick to the process. And like Dr. Vanderzel was saying, task analyze, slice it thinner when you hit a problem, and just keep shaping. And so we just recommend dose it up as high as you can that the resources allow you to do. And if I could just take a moment, I know this isn't part of a question, but I feel very compelled to say this. This group at UCP is a high-end group. They have scaled this up in an unprecedented way. There's probably 2 companies we work with a fair number, that have been able to scale it up in the manner which UCP has. And it's just really an honor to work with this crew. And they've given me more hope in our abilities as consultants than anyone else. And I hope it's not false hope, because I believe a lot of this confidence is coming from the uniqueness of this crew. But they really did teach me that this was possible under conditions where maybe in the past I had more concerns, and I was a little reluctant to say, we can do this with adults, we can do this in residential facilities. No, that learner's profile is not a problem. And I believe those things now, and a lot of these beliefs have been shaped because of my collaboration with this group at UCP. So again, I'm very thankful, and it's a super group. And thanks for the chance to sit in on this. It's really fun.
Thanks, Dr. Hanley. So I think we do have some more questions, and I know we need to wrap up. What should people who are listening to the presentation or at it, have commented and we weren't able to get to their questions, what's the best way for them to follow up, or how will we follow up?
So we'll have all these questions on here. We'll look for some opportunities that we might be able to respond to those. I know that this was the first time for us doing it. We're working through some kinks. I really like this format. For us, we love giving back to others that are looking to move forward with this process. I think, for me, it was a long time in this industry, over 20 years in this industry, and particularly with more of the severe end, never feeling like we really had it right with how we address problem behavior. And this has given us a lot of confidence in the way that we can get to more meaningful outcomes. So I'm excited about that. So we'll take a look at what the questions are. We'll hopefully be able to get back and do this again with some other examples from our adult population. We have a lot of video right now, and our goal for this next 3 to 6 months is try to get some of those videos put together so that they can more clearly show the process both on our children as well as with our adults. and be able to get those out to you. So we'll take a look at next steps with this, and I'll post it back to either through an email or through the Facebook group around next steps with this particular video, as well as where we're going to go with upcoming videos. And I think that was probably
Yeah, so somehow we're gonna get that, I think people are concerned about the application we're using. We'll get it back out to everybody in some format, like a Q&A
Right.
of some kind, right?
The other thing I'd recommend is at the end of the month, we're going to have Greg Patton-Greavy here talking about how the IISCA integrates with the EFL, and that's great for our learners. But also at the time, I think we'll be able to speak a little bit about the universal protocols and how those are integrated through this whole process and the foundation for addressing challenging behavior in a population where you see it quite often.
I think also certain questions might be able to be addressed to slabouf@gmail.com, depending on the question.
The question comes with a photo of
Yes.
Absolute.
And if anyone
We're
does
more
know
like
Shia
the
LaBeouf,
response.
if anyone does know Shia LaBeouf and he may be interested in working with us related to
Motivational speaker?
a video, a motivational speaker, I love that guy, and I've made everyone here love that guy. So we definitely like to get connected with Shia. That's it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're just